On the morning a family walked toward a small sailboat on the coast of France, nothing looked strange. There was no screaming, no panic, no obvious sign that something terrible was about to happen. Just a quiet harbor, cold air over the water, boats moving gently against the dock, and a father preparing what looked like a short trip with his 2 children. A trip that was supposed to end in a few days, but the boat did not come back. And at first, that was the story everyone wanted to believe. A small sailing accident, a family caught somewhere between bad weather, cold water, and the unpredictable sea. But then investigators searched the family van, and inside that van, they found blood. Then they searched the family home, and there was more blood. And suddenly, this was no longer just a missing boat. It was something darker. Something that began on land, moved out to sea, and then scattered clues across beaches, coastlines, and ocean currents for years. The case became known as the disappearance of the Godard family, and even today, it remains one of the strangest mysteries in modern France. Because in this story, some things were found. A dinghy, a life raft, documents, credit cards, personal belongings, bones. But the most important things were never found. Not the boat, not Marie-France, not little Marius, and not the full truth. So what really happened to the Godard family? To understand why this case still feels so disturbing, you have to begin before the boat ever left the harbor. Yves Godard was a doctor and acupuncturist in Normandy. To his patients, he was part of everyday life, the kind of person people expected to see again next week. A waiting room, an appointment book, a quiet office, normal routines. But on Monday, August 30th, 1999, Yves saw his patients for the last time. The next day, he canceled his consultations. He began putting his affairs in order. Then he took his 2 children, Camille and Marius, fishing near quiet countryside ponds. It sounds harmless, almost peaceful. A father spending time with his children. But when you look at it, after everything that happened, even the peaceful moments start to feel different. Because sometimes, tragedy does not begin with violence. Sometimes, it begins with someone quietly changing the schedule. On September 1st, Yves arrived in Saint-Malo, a historic port city on the French coast. There, he rented a small sailing boat, a Jeannot Sun Odyssey 30. Its name was Nick. The trip was supposed to be short, a coastal cruise, a few days at sea, a simple return. But Marie-France, Yves' wife, was not on the boat. Only Yves and the 2 children were seen leaving. Camille was 6, Marius was 4. And from that moment, the story splits into 2 mysteries. One on land, one at sea. On land, there was the question of Marie-France. Where was she? Why had she not gone with them? Why had no one seen her? And at sea, there was the question of what Yves was really doing with his children on that boat. Before sailing, Yves bought cleaning products and cloths. Those items were later found in his vehicle. At the time, maybe that detail could have been ignored. People buy cleaning supplies all the time. But later, after blood was discovered, that small purchase became one of those facts investigators could not look away from. The boat left Saint-Malo. From the shore, it would have looked like any other boat heading into open water. A white sail, a gray sky, a wake slowly fading behind it. And then, once the land disappeared, everything became harder to know. Because the sea does not keep time the way land does. On land, there are doors, neighbors, phone calls, appointments, witnesses. At sea, there's distance, fog, water, silence. On September 2nd, French customs officers inspected the boat between Cap d'Erquy and Cap Freyel. They saw Yves. They saw the children. One child was reportedly sleeping inside the cabin. It was a routine inspection. Nothing dramatic happened. No one was calling for help. No one was visibly injured. And after the inspection, the boat continued. That moment became one of the last official sightings. And it creates one of the case's most haunting questions. If something terrible had already happened to Marie-France on land, why would Yves continue into public waters with his children? Why take the risk of being seen? Why allow officials to inspect the boat? Was he calm because he had a plan? Or because the worst had not happened yet? In the days that followed, witnesses said they saw the boat near the Bay of Boyhek. One witness, a waffle vendor, said Yves and the children came to buy waffles. That detail feels almost impossible to reconcile with the rest of the case. A father, 2 children, a small, ordinary purchase, a public place, a normal moment. But sometimes, the most disturbing part of a mystery is not the violence, it is the normality surrounding it. Because if the witness was right, Yves wasn't hiding in panic. He was still moving through the world like a father on a trip. Then the return date passed. Nick was supposed to come back to Saint-Malo, but the dock space remained empty. No boat, no father, no children, no explanation. On September 5th, an inflatable dinghy from Nick was recovered at sea by a fishing boat. Inside were personal items, including a jacket and a checkbook. But there was no one in it. No distress call had been made. No clean story presented itself. And that is when the first version of the case began to form. Maybe the boat had suffered an accident. Maybe the family had been swept away. Maybe the sea had simply taken them. But that theory did not survive for long. Because when investigators looked at Yves's camper van in Saint-Malo, they found blood. And not just a tiny trace that could be explained away. The discovery changed everything. Now investigators were no longer looking only for a missing sailboat. They were looking at a possible crime. On September 8th, they searched the Godard family home. Inside the quiet house, they found more blood. In the bathroom, in the living room, in the bedroom. The ordinary home became part of the evidence. The hallway, the kitchen, the empty rooms, the places where a family had once lived. Marie-France had not been seen since the end of August, and soon, the blood found in the van was identified as hers. That single fact pulled the whole story backward. Because if Marie-France's blood was in the van and in the home, then the mystery had likely started before the boat ever touched the water. A murder investigation was opened. Yves Godard was considered the main suspect. But there was one problem. Yves was missing too. So the investigation had 2 impossible directions. Was Yves a killer who had escaped? Or was he also a victim? Was the boat trip part of a plan or part of a trap? Was the sea covering a crime? Or was it the crime scene itself? Over the following months and years, clues began to appear. But instead of solving the case, they made it stranger. A life jacket was found near the Channel Islands. A life raft appeared on an English beach. Documents and cards were recovered. Personal belongings surfaced in strange places. Some evidence seemed to have drifted through the water. Other evidence looked too well preserved. And that raised another question. Were these objects naturally carried by ocean currents? Or had someone placed them there? That possibility is what makes this case feel so unsettling. Because the sea can scatter evidence. But people can scatter evidence too. At one point, a canvas bag was recovered by fishermen. Inside were personal effects, clothing, documents, binoculars, a small hammer. Marie-France's belongings also appeared among the recovered items. And every discovery reopened the same wound. If Marie-France never went on the boat, how did her belongings become connected to the sea? Had they been brought aboard? Had someone tried to create a false trail? Or was there a part of the story investigators never reached? Search teams looked for Nick. The Navy searched the seabed. Sonar scanned the darkness below the water. But the boat itself was never found. That is one of the biggest mysteries. A boat can sink, yes. A boat can be broken apart, yes. But for a vessel to vanish completely, while pieces of the family's life keep washing up, gives the whole case a strange, unfinished shape. Then came the most painful discoveries. In 2000, remains linked to Camille were found. The little girl who had once boarded the boat with her father and brother was no longer only missing. Part of the mystery had become real, physical, final. But there was still no Marius, no Marie-France, no boat. Years passed. Then, in 2006, bones belonging to Yves Godard were found in the English Channel, near Herd's Deep. A femur, a tibia, enough to identify him, enough to prove that Yves had died, but not enough to explain how. And strangely, finding Yves did not solve the case. It only removed one possibility. He had not simply escaped and started a new life somewhere far away. The rumors of sightings, the claims from hotels, the whispers from other countries, all began to feel weaker. But the central question remained. If Yves died at sea, what happened before that? Did he kill Marie-France and then take the children onto the boat? Did he stage a disappearance? Did the boat sink accidentally after a crime on land? Did someone else become involved? Or did the family encounter something no one has ever been able to prove? The case attracted theories because the facts left too much room. There was a theory of a sailing accident, a storm, a sinking, a tragic loss at sea. But the blood on land made a simple accident hard to accept. There was a theory of murder-suicide, that Yves killed his wife, took the children out to sea, and ended everything there. But that theory also had gaps. Why appear in public? Why allow inspection? Why did objects surface in such strange places over such a long time? Then there was the theory that another person, or other people, were involved. That someone handled evidence, that someone planted items, that the case was larger than a family tragedy. The theories are not proof. And in a case like this, a dramatic theory can feel satisfying while still being wrong. That is the danger. The human mind hates unfinished stories. When a case refuses to give a clean answer, we begin building one ourselves. We look at a bloodstain and imagine the room. We look at a boat and imagine the final wave. We look at a child's toy and imagine a final moment. But the truth does not always arrive in a form we can narrate. Sometimes it arrives as fragments. A cart in sand, a raft on a beach, a bone from the seabed, a closed case file. There were also later discoveries that made investigators uneasy. Some cards and documents appeared years after the disappearance. At least some of them seemed too well preserved to have spent all that time in the sea. That does not automatically prove someone planted them, but it does raise a disturbing possibility. What if someone still had access to pieces of the mystery? What if not every clue had been left behind in 1999? What if evidence was still moving after everyone was supposed to be gone? That is why the Godard case never feels completely settled. It is not only a story about a missing family, it is a story about clues that refuse to behave. The official investigation continued for years. Searches were conducted. Witnesses were questioned. Leads came and went. Anonymous letters pointed investigators toward possible locations. At least one search near a cemetery produced bones, but they did not belong to the family. Each false lead created a new burst of hope, then another collapse, and in the background, the same three absences remained: Marie-France, Marius, Nick, the mother, the little boy, the boat. The case was officially closed in 2012, but closure in a legal sense is not the same as closure in a human sense. A judge can close a file, an office can lock a cabinet, a police desk can be cleared. But unanswered questions do not disappear just because the paperwork ends. Where is Marie-France? Where is Marius? Where is the boat? And what really happened between the quiet family home in Normandy and the cold waters of the English Channel? Maybe the truth is brutally simple. Maybe Yves killed his wife, took his children to sea, and died with them. Maybe the boat sank, and the sea erased most of the evidence. Maybe the scattered belongings were just the strange work of currents, tides, and time. But maybe not. Maybe someone else touched the evidence. Maybe someone else knew more. Maybe the most important part of the story happened in a place where no witness remained. That is what makes this case so haunting. It begins with ordinary things: a canceled appointment, a parked van, a rented boat, a father with his children, a home left behind. Nothing in those details announces itself as history. Nothing says this is the last normal day. But afterward, every small action becomes heavy. Every object becomes a clue. Every silence becomes suspicious. And the sea becomes the only witness that never speaks. Some mysteries stay alive because there are no clues. This one stays alive because there were so many. Too many to ignore. Too few to complete the picture. Enough to suspect, not enough to prove. And maybe that is why the Godard family disappearance still feels like a locked room with no walls. The room is the sea. The door is the missing boat. And the key is somewhere beneath the water. We want Nick to appear. We want one final discovery to bring everything into focus. A wreck on the seabed, a document that explains the plan, a confession that can no longer come. But the case does not give us that. It gives us a quiet harbor at dawn, a boat leaving the coast, a family that never returned, and a truth that may still be lying somewhere in the dark water, unreachable, waiting under the waves.